here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our exciting session here on cybersecurity entrepreneurship. So we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about the life of a cybersecurity entrepreneur and talking about what it's like to be an entrepreneur, what it's like to start your own cybersecurity company. Now, I am not a cybersecurity entrepreneur. I work in cybersecurity, have worked in it for about 16 years now. Spent my first 12 years at BlackBerry, and I spent my last 4 years working for a company called Georgian, which is a growth stage venture capital fintech based out of Toronto, Canada. And we invest in really high growth, really exciting B2B SaaS companies that align with our investment thesis areas, which are around applied artificial intelligence as well as trust. And obviously a big part of customer trust, arguably the biggest part, is cybersecurity. And so very excited to have with us today two of the companies within our portfolio, two of our best co-founders and CEOs here with us. And then we're also actually co-hosting this session with NightDragon. NightDragon is a growth stage and late stage venture capital firm based out of San Francisco. And they thankfully partnered with us and had us given us access to two of their best cybersecurity CEOs. So we're going to have some amazing discussions today about what it's like to be a cybersecurity founder, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Hopefully more good than bad and ugly, but I guess we'll find out. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. So we've got Eldon Sprickerhoff, who is the co-founder and Chief Information Officer of eCentire. We have Mariano Nunez, who is the co-founder and CEO of Onapsis. And then we also have Ori Eisen, who's the founder and CEO of Trusona. So maybe to kick things off, guys, first and foremost, thank you very much for joining us today. I know how busy you guys are, and hopefully we can pick your brains a little bit and get a little bit of your wisdom just around kind of what it's like to start a cybersecurity firm. So with that in mind, maybe I'll pass it over to each of you guys to do kind of a quick couple-minute introduction on your own personal background. And then I would personally love to hear your founding story. How did you actually go about founding the company? What were the personal and professional reasons for that? And what made you decide to ultimately pull the trigger to go ahead and start a cybersecurity firm? So Eldon, I believe you actually have the distinction of having the oldest cybersecurity firm here. For those who don't know, eCentire was founded way back in 2001, meaning that people that were born that year are turning legal drinking age this year. So Eldon, why don't you kick things off? Tell us a bit about your background and tell us about the genesis of eCentire.
Sure. So thanks, Alex. As I said, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary last November. And so my background, before I started eCentire, I was sort of doing that lone wolf consultant. And part of that was working at a prime brokerage in New York. And so I'd had and before that, I worked at a few different software companies. I worked at Royal Bank for a bit. I have a degree, a BMath in basically computer science from University of Waterloo. So that's sort of my background. I'd say that, since I was a consultant for about 5 years, I was pretty comfortable with sort of the rough and tumble, feast and famine of security consulting. And, I came off this one gig in late 2001, and it says, I was living in New York. There was something that happened in New York that made it a good idea to come home. And we just had our first kid earlier that year. So again, a lot of good reasons to come back to Canada. And I'd had some ideas. So as a sort of my entrepreneurial spirit sort of, growing, as a lone wolf consultant, but then, basically take the ideas that I had sort of, can you blend some of the actual incident response modeling into a managed information security service? And that's, at that time, there wasn't really anything that was doing that sort of blend. And so that's now turned into what we refer to as managed detection and response. So, that's kind of the start of my entrepreneurial spirit, that spark. And I always knew that I could always, fall back on the hustle of lone wolf consulting if needed. So that's my story.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. Let's go over to Tamer next. So Tamer, you are the co-founder and also the CEO of Human, which is all about bot detection. So tell us a bit about kind of your personal background, and then tell us what made you decide to found Human.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, Alex. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. We started Human Security, then White Ops, about 10 years ago, focused on bot mitigation. So that's what I've been working on for the last 10 years. Prior to that, I was doing a few of my own data startups, and then my early career was in the Air Force. I spent a little over a decade as an aviator flying C-130s and H-60 Pavehawk helicopters in largely the search and rescue mission, and then ultimately transitioned into the private sector to build technology. I studied engineering. Coding was my first passion. I was the co-founding CTO, actually, of this company for the first 7 years before I stepped into the CEO role. And botnets and bot mitigation wasn't a well-discussed topic 10 years ago, but it's one that we saw and has emerged to become one of the most important problems in security this decade. The things that you can do with 1 million humans only gets more interesting. And so it's been one of the most interesting problems I've worked on. And we've grown to see now we process over 15 trillion API calls a week to our system to decide whether or not there's a human on the other end of some application or website that is doing something. One of the most interesting problems, and one of the toughest things, is building a company over 10 years, the first 10 years of a company. But very glad to be here with everybody and such a great group of people.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us, and definitely want to dig in a little later on kind of those first 10 years, because I think, not even the first 10 years, but maybe even the first year or two are probably some of the most challenging, and we'll definitely talk about that. Before we do, let's go over to Mariano. So Mariano, you are the co-founder and CEO of Onapsis. Tell us a bit about your background and what Onapsis does.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, Alex. Yeah, my background, look, my journey started after I watched a movie. I'm sure that many of my fellow panelists here will remember a movie called Hackers back in the day. And that's really when I fell in love with cybersecurity. I was 12 at the time, so I was pretty young, but I was just blown away by the idea of like hacking and this intellectual challenge and the movie, which was a lot of sci-fi, but it was really entertaining. So then I started working as soon as I could. Actually, tried to work for free for a well-known consulting firm. I'm originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. So I started working there as essentially an offensive security researcher, doing red team, penetration testing, vulnerability research. And really by accident, I remember my boss coming and tell me, hey, you need to kind of do this engagement. We need to hack into this web application for this customer. It was a large healthcare business. And he was like, hey, by the way, this is running on SAP. And I didn't really fully know what SAP was at the time, but I started with another colleague going and trying to basically break into the application so we would find the security flaws and help them mitigate them. And it was like one of those aha moments where we're starting finding essentially 0 days, right? We started finding vulnerabilities in the application, but we realized it was not on the custom code. It was not something that organization had not done properly, but it was really the underlying framework. It was really the underlying SAP application stack. And then we did the same on someone else that let us play with some Oracle business applications, and we found the same type of thing. So we went online. There was a forum called Security Focus at the time that you will see all the vulnerabilities by vendor. And I think the aha moment was that we saw everyone focus on Microsoft security research, like on Cisco, on Oracle databases, but we realized that no one was really doing research on business critical applications. Right? And if you think about it, the most critical data, the most critical processes of the largest companies in the planet are flowing through these systems, like ERP, CRM, supply chain, HR systems. So we basically found that, I think we stumbled really upon this kind of major blind spot and gap in the security programs of the largest companies in the planet. So that was really kind of the aha moment for us. We realized that us, without knowing the business apps, but thinking as a hacker, we were able to change salaries, shut down manufacturing, perform financial fraud. So it was an important problem to solve. So we really founded Onapsis almost 12 years ago now with that mission of really protecting business applications across the largest organizations in the planet. So We continue to execute on that journey now, focus on these on-prem business apps, now cloud-hosted and native SaaS solutions, really making sure that our customers have the crown jewels protected.
That's fantastic. Cool. And last but definitely not least, we have the one and only Ori Eisen. So Ori is the CEO and founder of Trusona, and he's actually a multi-time founder. So before that, he founded another company called 41st Parameter, which, if I remember correctly, I believe exited to Experian for a pretty good exit. So take us through maybe your experience as kind of a multi-time founder, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay, I assume? Yes, this is my fourth startup, and if you ask my family why I do this to myself, they don't have a good answer. But I love the joy of building new things. If I feel that I'm not building, I'm probably in the wrong place. And I think some of my fellow entrepreneurs here, if you dig deep enough, you'll see that is the real joy. If I'll give you the same job at a large organization and you can never make decisions and everything is a committee and everything has red tape, you'll see that, oh my God, I don't really enjoy that anymore. The journey that I had with Trusona and also before with 41st and other companies is very similar in one way. And I love how people here are 20 years and 10 years in their companies. The journey always has something you need to resolve in every step of the way, in every day of the journey. Let me explain. Some people think that, let's just take Salesforce as a large company, and people say, oh my God, they're big and they're profitable and they're public. They have no problems then, right? No, they do have some problems. And no matter what, the problems just keep shifting. So when you have just an idea and a napkin, your problem is to get funding. When you get the funding, your problem is to get employees. When you get employees, your problem is to get offices. When you get the offices, your problem is to get customers. When your problem is after that, it's to convince the analyst that you're right. Like every single step of the way, you need to earn or sell or convince or persuade the world that your way, your vision of seeing the world is the future, and it changes all the time. So I say, when you get to that point that you're profitable and everything looks amazing, your board will say, well, you're not growing fast enough. Right? Every single time the entrepreneur has a challenge to go over. And the biggest advice I give people is, let's just say you're in AI or security or something that you really are good at. Over time, that will be 10 to 15% of what you will do. The other 85%, it will be managing the business, knowing finance, raising money, dealing with employees, right? Those are the things you'll have to do way beyond your core mission. So if you start a business and you're like 2 employees, 5 employees, 10 employees, you are still doing 90% of what you love and maybe 10% of what you don't. But over time, if you want to build a successful security company, you have to build it in a way that you would learn to love also the things that you are not doing in the early days, which are the most fun years. Let me just say it out there. But that is the secret to success. Otherwise, if you're not seeing that as part of the journey, you will not learn to love it or to like it. And that is why I think the grind could get worse for people who don't see themselves as the entirety of the security company and not just the hacking bit or the building bit or the tinkering bit, which I love and I'm sure you guys love too. But that is not the beginning and the end of building a great company.
So let's start with those early days. Let's talk about the most fun years. Ori, I like how you framed it, an idea and a napkin, right? You have an idea, you want to start a company, but you need resources, you need people, you need funding. So where do you start? Like, what is the first step to that? Let's say there's people listening to this that have that idea, they have that napkin, but they don't know what to do next. What are the first steps to starting a company?
It depends where you are in your career. If you're 18, the answers will be different than if you're 25 or 40. And all ages should start companies. When you're very, very young and you do not have your network yet, your credit card, your parents and friends are a very good board to start with for your early seed. Many of us have done that because you don't need much in order to just write a prototype to kind of show that things will work. You're still not building a company, but you're cobbling together your presentation to wow the next person who can open the wallet. What you would do after that is look at angel investors. And again, they're all over if you look for them or ask friends who've done it before for introductions. And angels really would be able to write you a $25, $50, $100,000 check, very similar to how the two Google guys got a $100,000 check before they had a bank account, from Ram Shriram as an example, because that person has a pot of cash that is designated to be very, very high risk, very high beta, and they know they will not make money on all of it. But if they like you and your ambition and your story, that is usually how you can get to your first 100K. And again, no big companies, no ventures, no Sand Hill road trips yet. What comes next is really where the entrepreneur begins to cut their teeth into proving that there is a business model. So the idea is great and the napkin is wonderful and my little demo is working, but that's not a business yet. After that, you need to show, if you give me $5 to $7 million, aka Series A, or even $2 to $3 million in like a, seed plus as it's called, you can now show that you can build a business with a business model and a wash, rinse, repeat motion. Many of us tech geeks or security nerds are not good at that bit. We don't think about that as a necessary evil to convince Silicon Valley to give us money. So it would be great if you're listening to this and you're just a technical founder to get somebody to be your co-founder or a COO or a CFO to help you talk the talk, make the presentation look, even if you don't have the skills, but that you can circle or envelop yourself with people who can do it, because that will be the key to getting the funding that you need. The napkin can only take you so far.
And I love that point in terms of just partnering with someone that complements your skill set. And I think, the reality is many of us come from technical skill sets, and oftentimes we have to kind of partner with business people. I'm curious about the rest of the panel. Is that something that you found? Did you partner with someone more business focused or maybe someone more technically focused early on?
Yeah, and I think I fully agree with Ori, because I experienced the same. And I think it's also like the personal side of things. I was fortunate to have a great co-founder who's still in the business today, 12 years later. And I think it's complementing the business side that you don't know, right? In our case, I was running essentially BD, sales, and part of the technical side, and he was basically doing everything else, right? Like payroll, like keeping the business running, like all the operational things that are really, really critical, like all the legal contracts, and it's really, really critical. And A, you probably don't like it as a more technical or kind of business founder. B, you're not good at it. But I think C, the other side is more on the emotional side. I think I've seen other entrepreneurs who went at this alone. And I think as we're talking about the ups, the highs and lows, I think having a co-founder, someone that you can just have a beer with, you talk about what's going on in the business, how you get through stuff. I think it's also very important. So you can navigate those moments, right?
So, I had a co-founder right from the very beginning, but both technical. So, the sort of the big surprise I think we had in the first couple of years, even shrinking it down from 10 to 1, was that, whatever we were going to call success was going to take a lot longer than we first expected. And I think the second piece was, Alex knows very well, I'm pretty introverted. And despite that, I was going to have to get involved in the sales process because we didn't have really anyone else. Along with that sort of, best blending, I think probably the best thing we did as a company was bring on an adult, someone who had business acumen, because up till then, that's about 8 or 9 years into the business. We were sort of infosec cowboys, pew, 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 shooting down the bad guys. And, we brought in Jay Haynes, who's still with us. He came in as the CEO. He's the COO right now. But, he'd actually, run businesses. He'd raised capital. He knew what a sales pipeline would look like. And, that was definitely the point where, we went from sort of organic growth and up to that sort of hockey stick piece. And so, I think, I didn't have a whit of business acumen other than, from consulting pieces up till then. It's a different animal when you're hiring people and trying to, build a more sustainable sales pipeline. I think one of the other big things to Ori's point was, when if you manage to get a round of capital, of a raise, it doesn't mean that your problems are over, right? It's someone early on when we did our first, I guess, our Series A, I heard someone say, congratulating someone on a raise is like congratulating the chef on buying the groceries. Like, well, yeah, it's important, but it's not like it, and it's good, it's necessary, but you still got a long ways to go before that meal makes it to the table. So I keep thinking about those things right at the beginning.
I love that. That's awesome. Tamara, I'd love to get your insights on kind of the fundraising process. And, as Ori kind of mentioned, when you're first starting out, you can kind of bootstrap, you can kind of go on credit cards, get help from your family, get some angel investors. But eventually, once you reach a certain scale, you do need to start fundraising. And, speaking as someone who works for a VC, it feels like there's a lot of informational asymmetry there, especially if it's your first time going through it, because investment firms, they know very well how the fundraising process works. That's what they do, and they're very good at working with you and evaluating your company, but you're not necessarily as experienced as they are. So take us through kind of your experience of kind of raising your seed round in your Series A, and what are some of the things you learned there?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of if you build it, they will come mentality. And if you have a real idea that you believe in, long run will get there, you need to start building, and technology is only part of it. I think everybody's noting building the team is the other part of it. And often one of the things that you can overlook early on is just the importance and value of advisors. So building your team, and I love the old adage, even with founding teams, and I think it's evolved over time, but they used to say in Silicon Valley, you want a hacker, a hustler, and an artist to be at the center of any successful startup as far as the three founders, right? Somebody that can sell, somebody that can build, and somebody that can paint the picture and present it, right? And but if you extend to, what you need is the extended team that includes advisors. So early on, we circled the company and advisors, both in the form of people who knew the different spaces and verticals we were attacking, but also people who had experience fundraising and in startup phase and in growth phase, right? And when you get all that together and you're actually building, you'll start to get the introductions to VCs, and then you're totally right, Alex. The asymmetry for a brand new entrepreneur is sometimes overwhelming as far as like how to walk the fundraising path. When it really should be the opposite, right? Because there is a lot of capital that's looking for great technology to fund, and advisors tend to fill that gap. Building the network tends to fill that gap. I think of, early stage startup as a game of odds. So you want to tip everything to your advantage. And if you have no experience on your founding team fundraising, or getting beyond 5 years, then you want to make sure that you're in your network of friends and advisors, that you have some counterbalance. And then often the last thing I'll say is that often the value of a VC early on is also to fill in those gaps for you, right? Every dollar is not necessarily the same, and there's a lot of dollars on the market. You want to pick the VC that augments you as a team and supports the long-term vision and goals of the company, and that is an incredible amount of value to an early stage set of founders.
And Tamara, you mentioned kind of the wealth of capital in the market, and that's certainly true these days, probably more true than it's ever been. If we look at kind of cybersecurity investments in 2020, I believe there was about 12 billion worth of investments done, and in 2021 that ballooned up to 30 billion. So, if you look at kind of where we're at today around the wealth of capital in the market, there's probably not quite as much capital in 2022 as there was in 2021. But, to your point, if you build it, they will come. And if you have a fantastic company, you're going to have tons and tons of investors knocking on your door. So how do you actually go about kind of selecting the right one, especially if you're not used to working with investment firms?
Yeah, I've always looked, and this hasn't changed for me in the last 10 years through several rounds of funding. I've gone through at least five from the beginning. And I've approached all of them as extended members of the team. That's how I think of the board. Obviously, there's a fiduciary duty the board has for oversight and responsible behavior of the company. But when you're building a board, you want to think of it as a team and an extension of your team. And so you have to look at how the pieces fit together, just like you would in your own team, whether you're counterbalancing strengths and weaknesses of a team and how it fits together, and then how it applies to your strategy. So you think about the most important things, right? After the technology that you build and it being effective is the team that you put together, and that's both the people around you, not just the founders, but the employees, the advisors, and the board, and then the strategy. And all of it has to tie together. So if you get very clear on a strategy, sometimes that dictates what kind of investors and VCs you bring on, because they can help unlock, they can open doors. They can give advice in areas that you don't have. They can bring on talent in some cases. So I think of it as, similar to the process of building a team and interviewing folks, and whether the pieces fit together.
And Mariano, you kind of mentioned, the importance of having the right mindset, and the importance of kind of emotional intelligence, especially early on. But the reality, and the reality that I think we don't often talk about, is that a lot of startups fail, right? There's lots of statistics out there that 90% of startups don't last more than a few years. And so my question to you is, what is the right mindset to take in, especially if you're founding your first business? Do you have to keep that in your mind, and do you have to say, look, the probability of failure is higher than the probability of success, and I'm going to accept this risk? Or do you need to go in with the mindset of, no, I'm going to succeed, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this business succeed?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alex. I think you go in with the conviction that you're going to succeed, right? I think, and I know there's a lot of good literature or ideas around kind of failing, and it's not bad if you fail, but I think we're all here because we think we're determined to win, right? And we know, we believe in the vision. I think if you're jumping into something, you're founding something that you're not either passionate about the space or passionate about the problem you're solving, and what you're really looking for is this idea of having no boss anymore, that's probably gonna not gonna end very well, right? I think I personally believe that you have to be very passionate about the problem you're trying to solve, and you have to care about it. And I think you have to have conviction that you're seeing something that is achievable, and that's what's going to help you go through a lot of those bumps, because those bumps are going to be there, right? So I think you start with that mindset. Then I think it's maybe where the emotional intelligence and kind of maybe more of the resiliency and the personality and the team you put around you. I think what Tamer was saying on the board is so important, because you're going to go through lows. And I think also connecting back with what you said on valuation and how do you get around that. I've seen some companies or founders optimize for a crazy valuation or something that looks really good on a headline. But if you're optimizing only for that, and you may, let's say, be bringing a crazy person to your board because you're optimizing for that, because a crazy person gives you a crazy valuation, then you don't have a crazy person around your key part of the team, right, during those lows. So I think it's very important to decide who you partner with, right, and have alignment in terms of the more fundamental human values on integrity, on really that alignment of winning, and I think winning the right way, not just winning at all cost. I think that's critical. I think we've been fortunate that we could choose. Also, have 5 rounds of funding, and we could choose. But I remember one of the rounds I chose a lower valuation with one of the firms that offered us, because I really believe the partner on that venture firm was going to be key for us to scale, and it was the person I was aligned with, versus another option we had on the table that I didn't feel that was going to be a partner I would choose to go to war with, right? So I think it's almost how you prepare the conditions. I think you have the determination you're going to win, but then you make sure you have the right setup around you to make sure you can go through those challenging times, right?
And it's interesting because we talked a bit about kind of the overwhelming amount of decisions that you have to make early on, and how impactful those decisions can be on your business, because there can be a huge snowball effect. And especially if you're founding your first company, you don't necessarily know what the right and wrong things to do are. I want to open this up to the whole panel. I'm curious if we can kind of reflect back to the first business that each of you kind of founded and some of those early decisions, and maybe kind of take us through either a really, really good decision that you made that, you know, it turns out really helped your business and made things a lot easier down the road, or maybe just a really bad decision, if you're willing to share that, a decision that you kind of learned from and a decision that you wouldn't make again.
I would volunteer my worst decision ever. I started a business that would move money on the internet a year before PayPal, and I didn't take VC money. I thought if the idea is good enough, the napkin is really, really good, from a good restaurant, by the way, that, you know, the business will just grow on its own. Who needs these investors, right? The only thing that PayPal did better than me is had enough cash to survive longer. That's it. They made more mistake than I did, were shut down faster than I did by Visa and MasterCard, got more chargeback, but they had a war chest. They could manage their mistakes. If you live on a shoestring budget, you don't have time for mistakes. So if you're sitting on a very large idea, don't make the mistake that just by having the idea and starting early, you're going to end up doing it. I can name Nokia as one company that thought that. They were the king of phones at one point, and where are they now? I'll talk about BlackBerry as another example. It doesn't matter if you're the leader of a space today. If you really want to keep being the leader, you need to have all the wherewithal to succeed. So at the right time, take money from investors. It doesn't have to be VCs, by the way, but you need to have capital in order to afford making mistakes. It's that simple.
You know, I had, as part of my, you know, I said earlier on, would need to do sales myself. I brought on someone who had a very long tenure in sales, and it did not work out. I think they were near the end of their career and didn't really have the same drive and will and not skin in the game that I had or we had as well. And we probably lost about a year's worth of sort of traction in that. And in the end, I discovered that they couldn't actually be trusted, and that was a huge piece of that. So as soon as we discovered that he could not be trusted, we made moves to remove him from the company. And so I learned. Yeah. So and I learned.
Yeah. Mine are the same. I think the worst mistakes have to do with, especially when you're starting, right? And in my case, I was coming from Argentina, moving the headquarters here to Boston. And you meet these kind of executives in the industry that they've been in the industry for 20 years and stuff. And you get really seduced by their experience and the success. And at least in my case, I didn't fully understand what was behind that success, right? Were they really great executives and they really drove that success, or they were happened to be at the right company at the right time, and it was like almost really hard for them not to succeed and really not having the tools to dissect that. I think maybe as a tip, or if I had to think about what I would do differently, I would probably try to have more advisors interview these executives. It's the first time you're doing it, having more people part of the process. Try to do more like a confidential check with people in the market to see if they're really the real deal or not. Because the same thing happened to us, and it also you end up losing a lot of time, right? You have to rebuild that, restart that, and as already said, if you're not well funded, those could be fatal, right? At some point, and you're gonna go. I think you're gonna go through those mistakes. So like having this idea of like having backup when you're racing more than you think you need, because like things are not gonna go as you expect. I think is very important.
If you don't mind, I'll share one of Kleiner Perkins' rules. They give you their rules when they give you their money, and some of them are very wise, and some of them you only understand their wisdom when you have a pitfall. But this rule is based on companies, but I will make the analogy also to salespeople specifically. And the rule says, in a tornado, even a turkey can fly. So if you think about the .com era where people said, just add the word E to anything, E-trade, E-this, and you get funding, because there was so much cash available, even a business that had no shot ever, would look like they're successful. I agree with you, Mariano, that if somebody tells you I came from fill in the blank, okay, company that is successful, there's no doubt about the company's success, you really need to ask, were you there at the beginning and you helped crack the code of the go-to-market, or you were just swept in there because they were so starved for talent, and they basically sucked in everybody who was available, and then you're just riding the tornado, but you're a turkey, really. Sorry, but I have to say this because it is a very important thing to interview for, to ask people, have you done the work to make the success, or were you just there riding the coattail of somebody who was there either before you or did the work? I think many of us fall victim to assuming that if the person came of a successful company, they must be part of that success. And if you're listening to this, let me tell you, interview for that.
And I guess one thing I would add to that as well, to Mariano's point, is also make sure you get references, and where possible, try and get back channel references. Because if you ask the person for references, they're going to give you whoever they've worked with that likes them. But if you reach out directly over LinkedIn to someone that they've worked with in the past, you're much more likely to get a much more balanced perspective on kind of their background. And the nice thing about working in cybersecurity is it is still a relatively small industry, and a lot of us know one another. And if you do the right things, you're going to get a good reputation. If you don't do the right things, you're not going to get a great reputation. So, Tamara, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Either something a really good decision you made, or maybe a really bad decision you made.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with saying there are a lot of bad decisions and mistakes that happen early on, and it's important to also embrace that. And that's part of the game of early stage startups in the first year, is making as many mistakes early as you can to get the feedback, to get the information, to extract the knowledge. And then the question becomes something of, what are the most costly mistakes? And I always really appreciated Jeff Bezos's model around decisions here. He published in one of his shareholder letters early on around this idea of type 1 decisions and type 2 decisions. And type 1 decisions are irreversible. They're one-way doors. Type 2, you can change and reverse. And, the lesson always ends up being, for type 2 decisions, we should avoid the inclination to spend too much time debating and trying to decide, and more time empowering people just to move, bias to action, get feedback, and fail fast. And type 1 decisions that you should be able to write a 6-page white paper on, detailing your thought process, and debate it as a group before you take it. That model I found invaluable in the later years, and they would have been valuable in the early years around the most costly mistakes. And everything that everybody here says really resonates with me. I'd say that the most costly mistakes for me ended up in 2 categories. And the first one that we're all talking about is picking the right people early on. And the thing that Mariano and everybody are pointing out is just the underrated skill of interviewing and selecting somebody. It's incredibly hard to do that well. It just is. Back channel references are a must, and having more than surface level questions. There are books on this now that you can read, just different interview styles to try to get to the layer beneath the surface. But what Ori says is real about association. Like, don't think like an Ivy League resume is the reason to pick somebody. Sometimes it can be the opposite. Sometimes it really can be. So interviewing and picking the right people is one of the most important things. The second category of more costly bad decisions to me usually around the strategy and what ends up being the mindset around a plan B, right? And if you're really doing something where you have a plan B, then you're probably going to fail at your plan A. There is typically the valley of the shadow of death that you have to walk through at some point where you're not certain you will win. And if you don't burn the boats, as that saying goes, where you get to the island and you leave no other choice but forward, you put that at risk. And so, for us early on, look, we the bot problem has grown over the last 10 years. We saw it as something that was going to be impactful. Today, it's a part of over 77% of all security incidents and fraud have a bot used somewhere in the attack cycle. But we didn't know that early on. And we had a fork in the road where we had to decide whether we wanted to be an analytics company or a security company that defended against attacks. And our DNA was security, but there's this huge opportunity to become an analytics company. And we tried to tiptoe into it and lost 2 years of investment and progress by not doubling down on our DNA and not doubling down on a fork. So I think throw your plan B out the window, burn the boats when you have a vision and go after it.
So I want to make a bit of a meta comment here, which is the fact that I asked all 4 of you to either share something you did well or a mistake that you made. And all 4 of you decided to focus on the mistakes, which is interesting because there's obviously a lot of survivorship bias in the industry, and the 4 of you are survivors, right? The 4 of you are very, very successful entrepreneurs, and some of you are running multi-billion-dollar companies. So clearly you did more of the right things than you did the wrong things. Does anyone want to kind of, do a little bit of a humble brag and basically talk about, here's a really good decision that I made. Maybe I didn't even know it was a good decision at the time, but looking back on it, I'm really glad I did this.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll start by answering Alex. I think all of us are trying to give the best advice we can to the next generation. And I think the best advice would come from sharing our mistakes first. We can always tell you about the wonderful things we've done, but by no means we should not glorify being in a startup because it is hard to do. Pause for effect. I'll start just by wrapping what we said with a great Mark Twain quote who said, good decisions come from experience and experience comes from making bad decisions. So let that sink in. So I think we're all survivors because we have made plenty of bad decisions, but we could either maneuver quickly or learn fast or burn our ego to say, oh my God, that was not a good idea. Let's change direction. I would say this, there's probably a lot of great decisions that all of us have made, right? Because that is what makes the difference between the survivors and not. I would say this, the best decision I think I've made in my career was in 2008, where we were a company that was selling fraud solutions at 41st Parameter. And since inception in 2004, all of our code was running behind the firewall because there was just no other way to really sell anything else at the time. If you remember the word blades, or that's it, you would sell somebody software that they would run. The whole idea of cloud and running something outside of the data center of a bank sounded like you're going to the moon or something. And in 2008, our largest customer, HSBC, was about to renew their contract. And Tamer, back to your point of like burn the ships, we needed to make the most important critical decision of our lives. Are we going to let them renew the behind the firewall software, our bread and butter, or are we going to force them to move to the cloud, which is where we saw our future? And you can only imagine down to the employee level and the board level, it's half and half. Some people want security and safety and just renew it and let's not worry about it. And some people realize the cost of maintaining software behind somebody's firewall, the fact that we need to have fobs, like RSA fobs, to get into their data center to fix things is kind of crazy if you think about it. But I think the best decision, and maybe the riskiest or the bravest, was to tell the customer with all their millions of dollars, you can go somewhere else if you don't want to share our vision of moving your infrastructure to our data center of a colo location, later on to be called the cloud. Was not easy. It was probably, I lost a lot of sleep in those weeks. But let me tell you, customer number 2 could already hear, but HSBC did it, right? That's it. You need to make the bet and be very strong on the first one in order to have that reference. And then it's a virtuous cycle of success. But if we were to waffle and not do it, we would have died. Let me just be super clear, because you can't build a company that is really scalable by always putting things behind their firewall in today's days and age. It's just a model that doesn't work.
Yeah, I can add one maybe similar to Ori, but it's maybe a bit more conceptual, maybe a good tip for someone thinking about starting their own business, maybe in a new category. Like in our case, we had to create awareness about the problem in the first place, right? We were like realizing these business critical applications were not secure, but like no one was coming to us rushing saying, I know they're not secure, right? So we need to kind of create that spark in the market. And the decision we took was to really focus on like thought leadership and like research technical marketing. And I think if you're in cyber, it's a really good way to get to like, it's almost like changes the scale from a perspective. Like you can be a very small company, a couple of guys in a dorm or in a garage, and you can create something and put something out very cost effectively that really raises the profile of the business and more importantly of the problem statement and the market you're trying to educate. So in our case, we did a lot of that. Like we created a research labs early on and started doing zero-day vulnerability research and bug hunting, and we started presenting that at security conferences. So eventually got invited to speak at Black Hat, and following that Black Hat presentation in 2007, like there was a guy at the US Army watching that presentation. US Army then was super interested, followed up with us, and we ended up landing the US Army as the first customer while we're still in Argentina, right? And that, like you think about that, that's impossible if you like create a sales team and start doing all that before trying to land the customers. It's really expensive. So for us, that idea of like really, especially if it's a new category, educate the market, start winning a reputation in the market by being the technical experts in that domain. I think it's something that historically works really well in cybersecurity, because at the other side, you have buyers that tend to be like us, tend to be technical people and geeks that like to know that it's actually something real and people that know their stuff. So that's maybe one of the things that I think we did well, and I encourage like people in the audience to do that, because again, it's a pretty good cost-efficient way to get that first traction, early traction in the market.
And Mariano, you mentioned kind of the people in the audience here, and I think a lot of the folks in the audience are probably thinking about going into business for themselves and starting their own cybersecurity firm. And I want to touch on something that Ori said before, which is it's really, really hard, and a lot of people don't really tell you how hard it is. So, you know, if I can kind of oversimplify, I would say there's probably kind of two broad groups of people that are probably listening into this. Some of them are just kind of coming out of school, or maybe they're early on in their career. They've got a few years of experience, but they're very driven and very passionate, kind of like Ori is, about being their own boss and about starting their own company. And then there's probably some folks that are later on in their career. Maybe they have 5, 10, 15 years of experience. Maybe they're working in a mid-level management job in a large public company, and they're seeing a problem and they're saying, I want to go and found my own company. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks on the fence here. So, you know, Tamara and Eldon, maybe I'll pass this over to you guys. What sort of advice would you give those folks who are on the fence right now, and what sort of things should they be thinking about when they decide whether to start a company?
Well, so generally when someone asks me, you know, what's your piece of advice to start a company, I say, don't. Just simply, yeah, don't. And with that caveat, set, you know, simply that, you know, more often than not, you're going to find that you're, at best, you'll work for minimum wage the first 5 years. It's going to take at least a decade's worth of effort to go along with it. And, you know, if you're not comfortable recognizing that at the outset, you know, there's a lot of opportunity cost. You better have commitment. First, you better love what you do, and hope that you can continue to love what you do throughout the ups and downs. You better have commitment from, you know, your family, you know, those that depend on you as well throughout the entire cycle. And, you know, there's you know, there's so many misconceptions. I think that, you know, there's a couple of popular TV programs that, you know, you win the deal, and it looks like that's the exciting part of running the business. It's all, you know, they won the bids with, you know, whichever magical animals are up on stage, and that's it. And you know, there's, you know, you don't see the ugly parts, the due diligence that goes behind that. You don't see which things don't actually make it through due diligence and make it through. And so, you know, it's you know, I just say, usually I say, you know, like, where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? And you know, it's, you know, a lot these days I hear is, you know, I want to be that unicorn. And it's not that it can't happen, but statistically, it's highly unlikely. And yes, it is possible. You know, and I don't even like that term, even though, you know, I'm familiar with it. I don't like the term just because, you know, unicorns don't actually exist, right? And you know, with you know, if that's the thing that everyone thinks is the exciting part of it, you're going to be sorely disappointed, from especially the first 2 years, and all the way through to, you know, what, like, you know, to, you know, whatever you think success is, right? And I still have I personally have a lot of difficulty, you know, looking at what success is. And I think the problem is whenever you reach what looks to everybody else what success is, your finish line moves ahead, right? That might be, look, we did $1 million in sales. That's success. Well, that was success. Now it's 10. Now it's 50. Now it's 100, right? and you're never really going to, you know, you're never really, I think, at least personally, you're never really going to be satisfied, and there's always that itch for what's next. And it's not going to be, it might not be as easily quantifiable as what you might think that might be. So you don't, unless you're ready to put in some serious grinding.
I agree with a lot of what Eldon is saying, but I land in a different place. My advice would be, without hesitation, throw everything out the window and do it. I think in 2 years of building a company, you will learn more than you will learn in 10 years, you know, in a seat at a job, more than you will learn in 4 years of college. And you will build more friendships and understand more about life and business than you will have otherwise. And for those reasons, I think it's worth it. It is incredibly hard. It is messy. It is a grind. I wouldn't trade it for a second for, you know, a few years, you know, at a typical job. That being said, I would consider building your experience by working somewhere. You know, if you know, that's where you have to decide how much pain versus knowledge you want to get. You know, and look, my other piece of advice: startups is a game of odds, right? So tip the odds to your advantage. You are in training right now, whether you're in school or at a job. You are preparing right now, whether you're in school or at a job. You should be studying how the interview process works, figuring out how you would do it better, building your network of people, you know, all of that, with the anticipation of taking the leap. And don't be afraid about failing. Like, sure, 90% fail, but you know, what's not obvious is that a whole bunch of people that failed on the first time succeed on the second or the third or the fourth, right? And ultimately get there. So to me, it's just it's a different type of education, life education. And I would recommend it wholeheartedly. I think society and businesses would be a lot better and stronger if half the people, attempted to build a startup. And then the last piece of advice is, you know, be very mindful about who you partner with. Surround yourself with people that you trust, co-founders that balance you out in terms of skills and abilities. and people that you can spend day and night with for the next few years, because that matters.
And to that point, I don't, I'm an EIR. I've been an EIR for a few years, and I don't want to be completely negative here, right? And whenever I do my little spiel, I say, I truly hope the best, wish the best for everyone. And there's advice that I'll give, and it says, I hope you succeed in spite of my success or of my advice. I think what you said that especially clicked something for me was probably the biggest thing you'll learn on your startup thing is empathy.
Yeah.
Because 10 years out, whether you succeed or not, you will have empathy for someone else trying to do the same thing, and you don't necessarily have that when you have a net right underneath you, a safety net of sorts. So I'm going to walk mine back a little bit. Thanks, Steve.
I think it's the right dose of reality, Eldon, so I don't completely disagree.
Alex, is it okay to share one resource with the people who are listening?
Sure.
I get asked a lot, maybe because I've done this 4 times, and I always answer with the utmost honesty. And yes, it's a brutal answer when I answer, so Eldon, don't feel bad. Telling people what to expect is, I think, the most empathetic thing you can do for them, and not sugarcoat it. I have a blog that I run about this topic. It's basically my name and last name.com, and there's a startup advice section. I'm warning you, don't go read it if you don't want to hear the truth. I'll give you just the headlines of some of my posts. One of them is, only people who never been a CEO want to be one. And I'll tell you this to your face if you'll meet me, because we have glorified the startup journey, especially when you only hear about the exits, but you don't hear about the 999 failures, and the families broken, and the friendships broken, and people who were just hurting themselves, emotionally and everything else. That's part of the deal. So if you only want to look at the success and being a unicorn, or Eldon, there's also a decacorn I hear now, a new mythical creature of 10 billion valuation.
Yeah, that's my next success criteria.
Yeah, it's like, what you're only a unicorn, right? It's just not a good way to look at it. Yes, it's a game of numbers, and many do not make it. But if you have a good idea and if you have a vision, we can't tell you not to do it, because all of us are victims of doing it. So you need to hear that. But under any circumstance, don't glorify it, because it is like going to war, and you need to know that you might get hurt in the process. It's just nature of the beast.
And one of the things I say when I do a sort of negative, or not negative, but realistic perspectives, like, if you really want to do it, there's absolutely nothing I can say that will persuade you not to do it. There's not a word, not a phrase, no story that I can say. If you are really in it to do it with that will, nothing I can say will dissuade you.
And on that note, unfortunately, we are pretty much at the top of the hour. Time flies when you're having fun, and this was a really fun session, guys. So thank you very much, all 4 of you, for sharing a very small subset of your wisdom. As you can tell, we're just scratching the surface here, and this is frankly a topic that we could spend the entire conference discussing if we wanted to. But thank you very, very much, guys, for taking the time out of your day. Really, really good balanced discussion here. There's some really awesome parts about being a cybersecurity entrepreneur, and also some very real challenges. But thanks again for all your advice. And with that, I will pass it back to Valmiki.